In this video, we'll look at how to add user accounts and login to our application, and we'll also look at security. With security, we'll think about two considerations. One is, what can users read? What data do they actually see? And the second is, what data can they write? For the first, we'll be looking at publication functions and user accounts. So to get us started, let's add two packages to our application. The first will be called accounts-password. This will give us functionality to let users log in with a username and password. Next, let's add the accounts UI package. This will give us some out-of-box widgets we can use, like a login button in our application. Now we'll open up the application and jump over to the HTML file. Simply by adding the accounts UI package, I get a special helper called login buttons. And so I can just use the login buttons expression, and I'll save the file. And if you keep your eyes trained over on the right, you can see now that we have a sign in button. And when I click it, I get this nice sign in panel without having to do much of anything. Let's go ahead and create a new user account. I'll type my email address and a password, and I'll click the Create Account button. And now you can see I'm logged in. I can sign out by clicking the link and clicking the Sign Out button. Now let's modify our code so that when we create a to-do, it's assigned to the logged in user. So we'll jump over to our JavaScript file, and let's take a look at where we do the insert. So this happens when we submit the form, the Create New To-Do form. And what I want to do is to now add another field called User ID. And we can get the current user's ID by calling the User ID method on the Meteor object. Next, I'll jump down to the Publish function. Instead of publishing all to-dos for everyone, I only want to publish the to-dos for the currently logged in user. So I'm going to control what they're able to see. To do that, I can change my selector in the find query and say that I only want to return to-dos where the user ID is equal to this.userid. So inside the publish function, I can call this.userid to get the currently logged in user's ID. And now when we do that and click Save, on the right you can see all of the to-dos go away, and that's because we haven't created any to-dos for this particular user yet. Before we go too much farther, I'd like to go and show a message if there's no tasks. So let's go back to the HTML page. One of the neat things you can do with the each helper is you can provide an else block. The HTML inside of this block will get shown if there's no items in the collection. So I'll create a list item with the class of to-do item and empty. And we'll just say that there's no to-dos yet. Great, so now over in the browser, let me create my first to-do that's assigned to me. And now we see that to-do show up in the list because it belongs to me, the currently logged in user. I've opened up another browser on the left so that we can see in contrast that we have no tasks here because there's no currently logged in user. Where on the right we can see my first task because I'm logged in. Let's create another user. And now I can create a new task. And you can see that only her task is visible inside of the task list. So we've added a user accounts, and we're now controlling what data each user can see through the publish function. Now before we move on to write security, let's add one more user interface nicety. There's no sense in letting a user create a task if they're not logged in, since we only show them tasks that are for that particular user account. So inside of our create to-do item template, I'm going to use an if statement and use a special symbol that's available to us called current user. And that will be the currently logged in user. So if there's a logged in user, we'll show one thing. And if there's no logged in user, we'll show another. In this case, if there's a logged in user, we'll just show the regular create new to-do item. Otherwise, I'll show another one, and I'll just make it read-only. And the placeholder will say something like sign in to create to-dos. And now over in the browser, let me log out. And you can see now that the text box is read-only, and it's asking us to sign in order to create a new to-do. And then once I sign in, you can see that the user interface reactively updates itself, and now the input changes to create new to-do. Our next task is to control security on writes, namely the ability to insert, update, or remove records in our to-dos collection. So far, anybody can just open up a JavaScript console and type insert, for example. And that item will get inserted into the collection and saved up to the server. Now you'll notice that it's not shown in our list, and that's because it doesn't have a user ID, and so it's not being published out. But it does get saved. And so let's fix that next. To do that, I can start by removing a package called insecure. Now if I go back into the browser and I try that same line again, I'll get an error that says insert failed, access denied. And that's because now that the insecure package is removed, we need to explicitly set up the insert, update, and remove rules for our to-dos collection. Now you might ask, why do they have something called an insecure package? It sounds sort of crazy. But I think the reason is to let you get up and running quickly and test out ideas without being blocked by things like security. But as you start to build a more sophisticated application, you'll need to think about the security rules. Now we define these rules back in our JavaScript file on the server. So the server gets to decide which writes are allowed. So I'll scroll down to the server block, and the way that I can do this is by using a method on a collection called allow. There's a counterpart to the allow method called deny, but in this video we'll just focus on allow. I pass an object as the first parameter to allow, and it has as its keys the different mutation methods like insert, update, or remove. And the values are just functions. So for insert, we'll get a user ID and the document that's being inserted. Now in this case, we might say that you just need to be a user to create a new to-do. So I'll return the user ID, and if that's truthy, in other words, it has a value, then the insert will be allowed to continue. You might have some more complicated rules you can use here, like specific roles for users. So next we'll look at the update, and that will get a user ID, a document, the field names, and any modifier that's used to do the update. In this case, we'll allow the update if the user ID for the document is equal to the currently logged in user's ID. And then finally, the rule for remove, which takes a user ID and the document, will be the same as for update. So you can remove documents that belong to you, or to-do items that belong to you. And now with our new security rules defined on the to-dos collection on the server, we should be able to go into the browser and create new tasks. And I was able to create this because I'm a logged in user. And I should be able to update it because it belongs to me. In this video, we looked at how to add user accounts to our application, and then we looked at two types of security. The first is, what is a user allowed to see? We control that through our publish functions. The second is, what is the user allowed to write? In other words, what can they insert, update, or remove on a particular collection? For that, I showed you how to use the allow method on a collection on the server to define the rules for each of those mutation methods. In this series, we built a pretty simple application, but I'm hoping that it showed you enough of how to build a Meteor application that you know your way around now, and are ready to move on to a more sophisticated application.